It is a Friday, and I've been doing a lot of obituaries lately, and it's depressing, but something as we age, it happens. And so I had several people send me a note, including Mark, a good friend of mine from California, who said, "Hey, Steve, I think you mentioned that you're a big fan of KROQ Los Angeles, and in particular, you mentioned Jed the Fish. And Jed the Fish was an afternoon drive guy at KROQ for a long time, and he passed away recently. And I was shocked to learn this. I've had several other people send me this since I got this from Mark, but I'm going to go with the obituary from the LA Times. And you have to understand, Jed the Fish was on KROQ. KROQ is one of the coolest radio stations that ever existed. It's probably not as cool now as it was, like, say, 10, 15, 20 years ago. I broke out the KROQ bumper sticker for the occasion. I'll leave it there for a little while. But Jed the Fish, afternoon drive guy for many years, whose musical tastes helped shape the 1980s and 90s, died at the age of 69. Christine de Zerilla wrote this for the Times. Jed the Fish, longtime KROQ DJ whose tastes set up the station as a major musical influence in the 80s and 90s, died Monday morning. He was 69 years old. A legend of the airwaves. His friend Paul Sinecor, a casting director, producer, and drummer for the band East of Gideon, wrote, Jed was a pioneering voice in alternative radio, a beloved agent of chaos, and the man who made Los Angeles afternoons weirder, louder, and infinitely more interesting. Over 34 years in the afternoon drive, 34 years in Los Angeles radio in the same time slot is unbelievable. He transformed the airwaves into a launch pad for revolutionary new music and culture. It wasn't just that he's a good disc jockey, and by that I mean he was. He was the kind of guy, I remember driving home from Los Angeles, heading east on the 10, listening to KROQ, waiting for the music to stop so he would talk. And I recently watched, there was a several hour-long tribute that KROQ did in the afternoon just a couple days ago, and it's on YouTube. And they're all discussing different things about Jed the Fish. And one of the things that kept coming up over and over again was that he did everything differently. I can't explain it, and I can't imitate him. He was not imitatable. He was that unique. And he would come on and he would talk, and he had an interesting voice. He had a laugh that was unbelievable. He had good musical taste, and he had a feature they let him do where they let him play a new song, one new song, Jed's Catch of the Day. And he actually broke some new music to where major artists go, Jed the Fish is the one who introduced us to an American audience of any note. So his real name was Edwin Jed Fish Gould III. He died at home in Pasadena under hospice care, as close friends confirmed. The cause of death was an aggressive form of small cell lung cancer, diagnosed back in March. He passed at 6 a.m. That's when the world lost one of its most unique and brilliant personalities, announced his social media accounts, run for years by a friend, Catherine Davis. He passed away peacefully. His laid-back voice, and his voice was unusual, but it wasn't a bad voice. And in many respects, I hate to use this comparison, but if you hear him talk, especially if you're a Midwesterner, you're going to think he's talking kind of like a surfer guy. But it's not quite like that. I don't know how to describe it. But he had impeccable taste in music. And he practically defined Southern California during his time on KROQ, which is, of course, 106.7 FM. Most importantly, he introduced countless bands to the local audience, often before they were being played anywhere else. A list of bands that he's credited with being quite early on include Depeche Mode, The Cure, Duran Duran, The Smiths, Susie and the Banshees, the B-52s, the Go-Go's, the Germs, the Pretenders, Devo, Blondie, the Ramones, the Runaways, Oingo Boingo, the Motels, Missing Persons, Josie Cotton, the Pandoras, X, Social Distortion, Oasis, Dramarama, No Doubt, Katy Perry, Teenage Fan Club, the Donnas, The Offspring, and System of a Down. Now, I know of radio stations that brag and they go, we broke this one song. We were the first to ever play April Wine. One band. And you're like, who? I heard an interview where they were talking about the fact that Oingo Boingo, Danny Elfman, and Oingo Boingo pressed a very, very early record, and they printed up a couple hundred of them. It was an EP back in the day. Somehow, Jed the Fish got his hands on one and said, oh my gosh, this stuff belongs to radio, and played it on his show. And Danny Elfman will tell you that if Jed the Fish hadn't done that, he might be in a completely different place right now. Oingo Boingo is not as large east of the Rockies as they are in California, but they're like the house band for California for many, many years. They broke up a while back. Danny Elfman now does soundtracks and things like, the theme songs to The Simpsons. So he's got a couple bucks now. But if you look at the rest of the list, the Smiths, The Cure, Duran Duran, the B-52s, and so on, you realize this is like a who's who of modern rock from back in that era. His on-air interviews included chats with David Bowie, U2, Elvis Costello, Brian Eno, Sting, and The Police. And one musician said, I was a fan of Jed and his shows on KROQ long before I ever met him. This is a guy who was the guitar player in Offspring. He was the first DJ to spin Come Out and Play, which became a big hit. And it changed our band's trajectory in ways we never thought possible. His sense of humor was insane in all the best ways. Jed is forever a local hero who'll be greatly missed. Rest in peace, legend. And so Come Out and Play, if you remember that song, was a little different. And he heard it and he said, no, this is a good song, and he played it. So with Catch of the Day, Gould highlighted new music with his trademark irreverence. The madness inherent in his broadcast kept fans hooked. Cinecor, who met Gould in 1990 in the green room at the Whiskey A Go-Go in West Hollywood, said the show wasn't just a show, it was a happening. He captured the zeitgeist of the alternative era, understanding that music wasn't just entertainment, it was the heartbeat of a generation. He was at the pulse of the cultural shifts happening around him, bringing listeners the soundtrack to their rebellion, their youth, and their identity. It was LA's incredible good fortune that he was here, and that it was then. A longtime friend, Rudy Corner, said in a phone interview on Monday. Now, Gould did not smoke, and he assumed in late January an irritation he was experiencing was residual to the devastating wildfires earlier that month. So when other doctors couldn't find a simple cause after ruling out smoke inhalation or an infection, Dr. Drew Pinsky, also who got started at KROQ, I believe, suggested he get scanned in case it was something more serious, and unfortunately it was. He was born in 1955 in Orange County. He got his first-class radio telephone operator license in 1971 when he was 16 years old, and he programmed and hosted a radio show for teens in rural Arizona. But he got fired from the gig because at that point in time he chose to recite George Carlin's famous bit about the 7 words you can't say on TV, and it turns out you couldn't say them on the radio either. So Gould went to USC, the University of Southern California, and he graduated with, I believe, a degree in journalism, broadcast journalism. He pitched himself as Jed the Fish in KROQ in a flyer copied on salmon pink paper with a grainy photo that looked to be himself scantily clad, although he may not have been wearing anything, sitting in a wheelchair. There's a small diagram of a fish, and it said, look here, that's right, Jed will perform absolutely free on your station. The flyer said under the banner of a KROQ summer fish fry, 30 hours per week or less, 90-day max for free. And he got the gig. And several people mentioned that he didn't send in a tape and a resume like most people did. He made this weird flyer. But back in the 70s, he got the gig. And as Jed the Fish, he was the afternoon drive host on KROQ from 1978 until 2012. I remember going to Los Angeles, I'm guessing around 85 or 86, and I'd heard about KROQ and Jed the Fish, and I remember landing, and I had a Walkman, and I remember tuning into KROQ and just listening, and I remember hearing Jed the Fish, and at that point, I'd worked in radio a little bit, just a couple years, and I was blown away. It's I don't know how to describe this. It's like if you grew up watching like Beverly Hillbillies and I Love Lucy and thought that was the height of cinematography. Not comedy, cinematography. And then somebody goes, there's a thing called 3D and virtual reality headsets. Are you familiar with that? Oh, all you know is two-dimensional black and white? I mean, it was actually on some level fascinating to me, but it frightened me. Because I remember thinking like, wow, this is how good you can be. And I knew where I was. There's a spectrum, right? Jed the Fish was down there. I was over here. I had a long way to go if I ever wanted to be that good. And the thing about it was, he wasn't acting. He wasn't being a character. He was just an interesting guy who understood that if he was on the radio having fun, it would translate. I heard an interview with somebody else who said that they had heard of Jed the Fish, they'd heard of KROQ, and they're driving west towards Los Angeles and turning around. They finally got the radio station, 106.7, and they're listening, and this guy comes on, and it's clearly Jed the Fish. And he went for a really long time, maybe a half hour. I mean, he's playing songs and talking, without once mentioning the call letters, which is an absolute sin in radio. Many radio stations require you to say the call letters every break, and of course, the top of the hour. And this guy said, I was listening, and he never said the call letters. And later on, he actually had a chance to talk to Jed the Fish. He goes, dude, I was listening to you, and you were just music talk, never once said the call letters. And Jed the Fish said, yeah, if people are listening to KROQ, they know who I am, and they know who KROQ is. And he had good ratings. It didn't matter. He could do stuff like that. So he was there until 2012, and his unique taste in music helped the station set up as an authority on punk and new wave in the 80s and alt-rock in the 90s. He influenced KROQ, and the station influenced Los Angeles, and LA, of course, influenced California, and so on and so forth. So people have said, hey, as goes KROQ, so goes the country. We're talking about music, of course. So he really had no fear about the types of artists he played, Corner said, and that's one of the guys they interviewed earlier, before relaying a story about how Jed decided to play one of the early pressings of Michael Jackson's Off the Wall on KROQ one night, and boy, did he get feedback. His listeners weren't used to hearing Michael Jackson tunes, at least not songs from the adult Jackson. And they were like, what the hell? And Jed said, it's good. Playing it, it's good. And Corner says radio is so ephemeral because it reaches your ears and your memories, but it's not recorded in that sense. I understand you can tape it, but it's not how we remember radio. So some promos and drop-ins that are still in use on KROQ today were created by Gould in the station's studio when Jimmy Carter was president, he said. They still sound fresh. He also hosted a syndicated countdown show called Out of Order. And that was about 19 years, ending in 2013. And that's where he would do the top, I think it was 40 songs, may have been 20, but the top songs of alternative music, but he played them out of order. So in other words, you didn't tune in at the last minute to hear the number one song. That might be the first song he played. He just played in whatever order he felt like, because again, that made sense to him. So after he left KROQ, apparently he wanted to keep working in radio. So he worked briefly at KCSN-FM. I think it's affiliated with the university because it's 88.5. KLOS, which is 95.5. And then in 2019, he joined the Rock of the 80s Sunday night lineup on KROQ's HD2 station, which is streamed. He was named Billboard's Modern Rock Personality of the Year in 1997 and 99, and he won Radio Record's Local Modern Rock Personality Award. In 2004, he was named one of LA's top radio personalities. Gould is also a drummer and dabbled in music production and visual arts, and at one point he played drums with System of a Down at one of KROQ's famous weenie roasts, which is a thing they would do from time to time. Massive offbeat stone and tiled statues built by Gould sit in the gardens, pathways, and lush landscape around his home, which went to the market briefly in 2017. It's like something out of Alice in Wonderland, the listing agent said at the time. In the backyard, you really see the personality of the owner. Meanwhile, someone here says she considered him her chosen family and the uncle to her children. When he loved, he just loved. He was larger than life. So people who knew him personally said he was a great guy. And the number of people at the KROQ tribute they did on the air, the number of people were just talking about him off the air, what a great guy he was, but also like how unpredictable he was when he was on the air. Because when he's on the air, he just let it all hang out, but it was done in a way that was entertaining to listen to. So he came home from several weeks in the hospital the night before he died, returning to the Queen Anne Victorian home he loved. He had updated the house, which he bought in 1994, with a soundproofed music studio off the garage. And it says that early last week, friends all thought that chemotherapy would be the next step for him, but we still thought he had options. Then it went from one thing to another and suddenly turned into a race against time. He died at almost exactly 6 a.m., which was perfect because he never was a morning person. radio DJs, also at 6 a.m., is usually the traditional start of a morning show. But the fascinating thing about Jed the Fish was he was an afternoon drive guy. And it's in radio, there's a pecking order, and everyone always assumes the number one start any radio station is a morning show. Number two is usually afternoon drive, and that's because that's how they sell the advertising. Morning is number one, afternoon is number two. In Los Angeles, however, any drive time is huge because people are in traffic listening to the radio. And in fact, despite the fact that New York, I believe, has a larger audience according to, like, say, Arbitron or Nielsen, I believe there's more people listening to radio, especially in the afternoon, in their cars in Los Angeles than there are in New York. And so there's a big, big deal about people trapped in their cars in Los Angeles listening to radio. And I remember driving home from law school and listening to Jed the Fish on KROQ, and I remember specifically waiting for him to come on and say something. And it's not, think about this. Most people complain about disc jockeys. They talk too much. They need to play more music. When the guy is so good in the afternoons and you're waiting for him to talk, you're like, okay, that guy's got skills, and he had skills. So Cinecor, the first guy we talked about at the top, says he's survived by a community of artists, misfits, and fans who are changed by the sound of his voice and the daring freedom it represented. Jed the Fish didn't just play the hits. He was the disruption, the detour, and the spark in the signal. And like I said, I can't do him justice. I really can't. And I went onto YouTube hoping I could find some good air checks of him. And there aren't that many of them out there. And I don't know if it's because he just wasn't like a social media kind of guy or what it was. And I'm sure there's just people out there who've got them and eventually they'll post them. But it was literally that you could listen to the radio in Los Angeles. And there was a point in time where they had like 7 or 8 morning shows, all with $1 million guys on them, you know. And I'm talking about just, you know, everything from Howard Stern to Jay Thomas to Mark and Brian, you know, to Kevin and Bean, the morning show at KROQ, which is also very, very good. But most of those morning shows were in molds or patterns that you'd recognize. You go, oh, this is a morning zoo, or this is one of the, you know, this is the Shock Jock station or whatever. And Jed the Fish, as far as I can tell, was the only afternoon guy who was that interesting and that compelling to listen to. And the funny part about it was, and they mentioned this in one of the interviews that I saw, where occasionally program directors would come and go. And program directors are the people who decide, among other things, you know, they hire the music director, but they oversee the music that gets played, the formatting of the station, and who the hosts are and what the hosts can do. And Jed the Fish was there for so long that he outlasted all these different morning shows, but also program directors. And the weird part was that occasionally a program director would come in and say, hey, Jed, I don't like it when you do this. You need to do that. And once in a great while, he'd take their advice and realize it wasn't correct. So he'd just go back to doing what he did, and it worked. And I've seen so many radio personalities who spent 5 years here, 10 years there, 3 years there, 5 years back here again, then another 2 years over here. And I've mentioned before, one of my favorite people on the radio was a guy I worked with in Flint back in 1989. Really, really nice guy. And shortly after I went to law school, he left that station, went to work at another station. Then he left that station, went to work at another station. And he and I stayed in touch. And every Christmas, I'd get a Christmas card from him. And it would be in a different place. And I'd always look at the return address and go, oh, I got a Christmas card from him. Where is he now? Arizona, Mississippi, Georgia. Oh, Michigan again. Oh, no, Arizona again. And that's the prototype. That's a template for the typical radio person. Now, don't get me wrong. If you make it to Los Angeles, there's a good chance that you made it there because you're good. He started in Los Angeles. I mean, I understand he did the thing as a kid at the high school radio station. That's not the same thing. His first gig in radio of any sort was afternoon drive in Los Angeles. Now, KROQ wasn't that big of a station when he started. It wasn't. One of the reasons it became what it was because of him. He was one of the people who sang, here's the music we should play. And he was so unique that he was one of the people, when you thought of this strange radio station that played different music. And by the way, and for those of you who don't understand music or radio, this will make no sense to you, there was a time when these bands like The Smiths and The Cure and Duran Duran and Susan the Banshees were only being played on one major radio station in Los Angeles. And yet, outside of that area, maybe one or two alternative stations, but for the most part, college stations or, little stations here or there. They might have a new music show on Saturday mornings at 8 o'clock. They play new music for an hour. KROQ was playing their own brand of music with their own brand of DJs, and there's almost no explanation for it. But it worked. And I don't know why nobody ever copied it. And I think that a lot of people looked at the formula and said, well, it's partly their DJs, it's partly the music, and it's the culture they're in California. That wouldn't work in Seattle or Detroit or Cleveland in that sense. Don't get me wrong. Other cities had and have great radio stations, okay? But KROQ is one of the greatest. And if you talk to people in radio, people who worked in radio, and I've worked in radio, or people who love music, especially the new music of the 80s and 90s, okay? Think of First Wave on Sirius. They'll go, oh, KROQ, KROQ, KROQ. And they're more likely to mention Jed the Fish than they will whoever the morning show was or the midday show. Don't get me wrong, there's other people on this station, the Poor Man, Dusty Streets, things like that, people like that. Freddie Snakeskin, the Swedish Eagle. But they had a lot of unique and interesting people there. But Jed the Fish was the king of them all. And I'm just saying that in the sense of he's up here, and I think of the rest of them as being down here. He didn't appear to be egotistical about it. He was just simply doing what he did. But what he did worked so perfectly. And that's the crazy thing. I went to broadcast school a long time ago. I've known other people who went to broadcast school. And, in broadcast school, they teach you these basics, how to run the board, how to mixing console, how to edit tape back when you used to use that actual razor blade, how to mix songs, how to work a turntable back then, play carts, CDs, all that stuff. They teach you these basics. They can't teach you to have a personality. They can teach you the basics of how to work a microphone. It's an Electro Voice RE20, my friends. They can teach you the basics of that, but they can't teach you how to be a personality because a personality's got to be original to work. And this guy simply had the perfect personality to be on the radio because he could actually hear a song ending. Song is ending. He's got 10 seconds. And another song he's going to play after he's done saying something. And he's going to talk for 10 seconds or 30 seconds or, heaven forbid, a minute. But he's going to be so entertaining and so interesting, not necessarily funny, probably funny, but not necessarily, that you're going to listen through the whole break just to hear it. And then he's going to go into a song. And I remember punching the buttons on my radio, doing the exact opposite of what I would normally do. So if I'm in Detroit or at the time California, during any other time period, I would be listening to radio, and as soon as the DJ starts talking, I'd punch a button. I want to hear music. They're talking. Punch a button. Looking for songs I liked. But I'd go to KROQ and I'd go, song's about to end. Hang on. Jed the Fish is coming up. And I would listen for the breaks. And that is the highest compliment that someone can say about a disc jockey. I wanted him to talk more. And now it's not, I didn't want to play less music because remember, his catch of the day, he might spin something that no one else has played before. And guess what? It very well could be a hit. So a lot of these bands that I rattled off earlier are bands that will tell you, yes, Jed the Fish is the guy who got it started. And by the way, you may have heard the phrase, they often call them the world famous KROQ. And I believe that was given to them, that statement was made when In Excess was in the studio, and I think he was interviewing them and asked them about where they were and how they're getting along. And they said, well, now that we've been on the world famous KROQ, we've made it. But it might not have been his show. But be that as it may, chances are he was the first of the station to play their song. So there you go. So it's a sad day. The guy was 69 years old. He'd been off the air for just a little bit. But you can't understand unless you've heard him. So I'd urge you to go to YouTube and type in Jed the Fish, Jed the Fish, and everything from that name to what he did on the radio. And like I said, he was there, and his tenure there, the length of time he was on that station, okay, he outlasted program directors, he outlasted morning shows. He 78 to 2012. I went to law school for a couple years in the middle there, and he was cornerstone, foundation, whatever you want to call it, of a radio station that was so important and so unique that you don't know which is more important to the other, him to that station or the station to him. So again, I've got to salute Jed the Fish, afternoon drive guy from KROQ Los Angeles, 106.7 KROQ. And his musical taste helped shape the 1980s and 90s. And he died at the age of 69. Thank you, Mark, for passing that along. That's from the Los Angeles Times. Christy D. Zarilla, the assistant editor, wrote that. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.